listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation. I'm your host, and I welcome you to episode number 69. In this episode, we'll discuss the many different types of AI and use in mental health care, its benefits, and some of the risks. Our guest, Doherty, will discuss the significance of good data and privacy and data security in AI applications and emphasize the need for regulations and guidelines in this field. Our conversation will touch upon AI's potential to improve access to mental health care, offer some personalized treatment, track patient data, and evaluate medication effectiveness. We'll also discuss how apps can provide support and resources, track symptoms, and even remind patients to take their medication on time and why it's important to take it on time. We'll highlight just for a second the FDA approval process for digital therapeutics and a reminder once again the importance of those guidelines and regulations to ensure patient safety. Now, a little bit about our guest. Eric is a global executive leader. He is passionate about improving global health and well-being and works with companies that share this value. He leads based on 3 distinct pillars of excellence: teamwork, communication, and transparency. He has held several global senior leadership executive roles at leading companies including GlaxoSmithKline, Abbott Laboratories, and AstraZeneca, to name a few. He has completed 2 MBA degrees, one in international marketing from Washington University and a second in management from St. Louis University. Additionally, he's earned a graduate certification in executive leadership from Harvard and another graduate certification in global operational leadership from St. Louis University. Now, take a moment to check out his LinkedIn profile. If you are looking for an expert in global transformation, AI data, medical devices and pharmaceuticals, patient access and quality, global health and commercialization, change management, and more, then Eric is definitely your man. Okay, a little bit more and a reminder about RAN. At the heart of RAN's mission is the urgent need to support individuals dedicated to their recovery journey, but facing barriers due to insurance loopholes. With your help, we're on the verge of funding our very first Bridge grant, providing crucial financial assistance to those in need. Your contribution, no matter the size, is crucial in changing and saving lives. We are so grateful to have you as a part of our community. So with that, please remember our 3 C's of engagement. The first, click that subscribe, like, love, share, and the link to our website, and consider clicking that donate button today. The website link is www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. It's also in the show notes. Be the reason someone has new hope today. Okay, the second C, that is commit. Commit to staying for the full episode and consider all the possible ways that various forms of AI may revolutionize mental health care. And then our final C, well, of course, it's your coffee. So fill up your coffee, sit back, relax, and let's get started. Listeners, we've already kicked off and started, but I want to introduce our guest. And Eric, I'm going to allow you to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here. I will start with this though. Being a biomedical engineer, I love gadgets. I love advances in technology. And I also like to talk about the ethical use of all of those items. We did briefly talk about this topic that we're going to talk about today on episode 11. And so as you sent me listeners, Eric sent me some great homework to read ahead of time, which was really amazing that we're going to talk about. So we're going to let you in on the secret for that. But as you sent those items to me, I was just like, oh, this is so amazing and so cool. So Eric, tell us, give us your background. Tell us why you're here today.
Hey, thanks, Ange. Really appreciate it. Again, I'm Eric Doherty. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the best places to live in the world. And we just kind of conversed before we started to hit the record button. But my background's been in healthcare pretty much all my life. My dad was a pharmacist. My mom has a master's degree in biochemistry. And so I've always been doing a healthcare slash science part of the business on the healthcare side. I've been, worked in aspects within pharmaceuticals, within medical devices, and also in digital health. And so, when Ange connected with me, we had a discussion about, where we can kind of take this podcast to the next level within the technology side of the healthcare side of business. And, with my background now, really kind of running under the generative AI side of the spectrum. We had some great talking points. And so, where I'm going to be kind of talking through is some of the aspects of where really the artificial intelligence kind of spectrum is moving from machine learning into that generative AI space. And so, Angie and I are going to talk about that over the next 45 minutes or so.
Love it. So for the listeners who do not know what is defined as generative AI, how would you define that?
Yeah, let me kind of go back to machine learning AI and then kind of talk through as to what that means from the generative AI standpoint. So machine learning AI, artificial intelligence, has been around for about 25, 30 years. And basically what that is where you've got a certain composition of data that comes in from an element. So if it's a jet engine or if it's a manufacturing process, it's basically going through and having those elements of what that looks like and how that operates. And then basically you can tag that machine learning to basically look at that data and figure out, okay, if it does this, then it can do this. And if it does that, it can do this. And basically setting it out to where it will run a certain element of data to give a result. Where it's really cool for regenerative AI standpoint is where now you're taking the data, it's looking at it, it's going left, and they go right, but then it figures out what the better way to kind of move through that process is going to be. It might be better instead of going left to go straight. It may be better instead of going left to go right, based on the information that it's looking at from a data composition standpoint, and then obviously enlisting that better alternative. So basically, again, as you've probably heard for a lot of the news over the last couple of years, generative AI is really kind of learning amongst itself and learning about itself and learning to basically make the best decision going forward. And so that's kind of the huge benefit that generative AI brings. The positive and negative of that is that you have to make sure that there's really good data that's being used to make those decisions. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, but the element of ensuring that the data is, I would say, foolproof enough or safe enough data to be used to then make those decisions, and especially in healthcare, that is going to be the element of what generative AI directions will have to have basically as a pathway into the future.
Absolutely. So we talked about Georgia Tech and UGA. I will say that Eric has two children at UGA. UGA is a phenomenal school. Yes, listeners, you can record that I said that. However, you also know if you're listening to this podcast that I love Georgia Tech. And so being on the College of Engineering board and the board to the president, we talk about AI, and we have for several years. We really started talking about it when ChatGPT came out. And the conversation was, are we going to get rid of the entrance essay because of ChatGPT? Okay. And I love just from the very beginning, the way that scientists and engineers looked at this and said, okay, wait, and learning engineers and educational professionals looked at it and said, okay, first off, one, we've had students coming to Georgia Tech whose families have been able to afford to hire a tutor to help them write their entrance essays to Georgia Tech for a very long time.
So, and you did at Georgia Tech, not at UGA. So that's very clear.
Of course, never at UGA. And So we've had that for a long period of time. And because these schools, and I believe Georgia probably has the same initiative, they want students from all the counties across the state of Georgia. And so they said, okay, all this is doing is leveling the playing field. It's allowing people to use the tools that are available to them, and they still need to read it. Does it make sense? Does it align with my vision, my morals? Does it, in the very beginning, especially because it is a learning technology. I mean, it's ChatGPT is learning every single microsecond or millisecond or whatever you would call it, right? It's continuously growing. And so I love that Georgia Tech was like, no, we are going to continue to allow people to do it. And then if they're not smart enough to go in and make it so that it sounds like it, came from a human being, then they're not going to be at Georgia Tech, because we want them to be able to then use it. Fast forward a year later, we had several in the health space that said they actually didn't even want to hire people coming out of tech unless they had courses in AI, because they wanted them to be able to use tools to do things that can be done faster, more efficient, and all of those things. And so I love in just 2 years how much has dramatically changed in the field. And that's not even going into what we're going to talk about right now, which really ties into the medical use of it.
Correct. Yeah, again, a lot of the applications, even today, there's not a generative AI mental health app. They're working on it. There's actually a machine learning app that was approved last year, but there's not anything that's generative AI FDA approved, ready to go in the mental health space, which is kind of interesting for the fact that it's been out for a couple of years now on the Gen AI side. I will say, as I mentioned, I think in the next probably 2 to 5 years, we're going to just see an explosion of generative AI tools, both in mental health, in generalized healthcare, from a medical device standpoint to pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical development. A lot of elements of, I think, ingenuity, and also just the expansion into the use of generative AI around a lot of these healthcare applications.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the risks. So some of the articles that you sent also talk about some of the risks. And when Jim and I in episode 11 talked about, we were just really without any knowledge or experience throwing out ideas, right? And we said, okay, wouldn't it be great if you had a chat bot that could tell by the tone of your voice if you were feeling a certain emotion? Tell by the tone of your voice if you understood a question, right? And if you didn't, because of the tone of your voice, they could rephrase it in a different way. Tell by the words that you said, some things that they should progress you in. And I know one of the apps we were talking about deals with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right. Yeah.
And so there are pluses in that. And then of course there are challenges, because you also currently lose that human logical factor and have risks associated with it. So you want to dive a little bit into that, and we can dive into the first article that you talked about or a different one if you would prefer.
Yeah, I mean, well, just in general, I think the risks, as I mentioned, one of it is the good data, bad data. So you want to make sure that you've got good data that's being analyzed, that's being used for that generative AI purpose. But really, from a healthcare standpoint, excuse me, from a healthcare standpoint, it's also the privacy and data security. There's that element of it where obviously there's the HIPAA side of things where you want to make sure you protect the information that's being given by a patient, but it's the security around that information and make sure that it stays within the process of the system being used. So if it's a certain mental health app that's being used, or even a certain wearable that's being pulled from a data standpoint into the system, you want to make sure that that data is secure for that patient. The other part that you have to really be concerned with is around the biasness and the fairness of the use of the data. What's happening nowadays is the aspect of, again, from that bad data standpoint, the biases that can be pushed within that data kind of sphere, and the aspect of that data not being valid, not being validated. And so to ensure that that is an encompassing issue within the data that's being pulled in from that patient, that's going to be a huge element. And then really the accuracy and reliability. If that's not there, again, good data in, good data out, that's great. But if it's bad data, it can actually provide, unfortunately, bad elements of output of data. So that was definitely something you want to make sure that you try to steer away from. The other part is the ethical concerns. You want to make sure that from a ethical side, the data that's being used within a Gen AI system is obviously beneficial, that it does have those ethical constraints from a patient value standpoint, a patient element standpoint. That's a huge benefit. But I think the biggest thing that we're running into is that there are no guardrails. There's not really any regulations right now around generative AI. And that, unfortunately, is kind of making the space, not only in mental health, but just in healthcare in general, kind of the wild, wild west, where a lot of apps are starting to come to fruition. A lot of apps are kind of being pushed out there. A lot of systems are being pushed out there that may not necessarily have kind of your best interest as a patient in the best of mind. And so the aspect of those rules and regulations that I think they're starting to kind of think about and starting to put into play are some of the things I think will be of benefit in the next probably 1 to hopefully 2 years at the most. But in the meantime, be wary. You've got an app that you're using. Again, just make sure you do your due diligence and to ensure that app is a valid app, that it is a app that it would be helpful. Because right now there's no guiding principle, there's no guardrails, there's no regulations to really kind of specifically look at those apps to make sure that they are applying to a patient.
So that's a great point, because my whole background up until just recently, until my current job, which, by the way, we use 3D imaging and machine learning and machine AI for tagging things in the manufacturing space. And so I once again love technology, but I've spent most of my career in clinical research space and have been so used to every single thing requiring multi-year clinical trials that are double-blind, placebo, that are so heavily controlled, really taking a lot of money to get approved by the FDA. And then you have these apps that could, for example, be therapy apps that could talk to someone, but the app itself doesn't have a degree in psychology, right? The chatbot doesn't have a degree in psychology. They haven't graduated from some illustrious, university and received that. It's been programmed by someone.
Right.
And so as a user, if you were going to download or utilize one of these apps, what steps would you take, or what steps would you advise? You have kids in college, okay? So that's a vulnerable age. What advice would you give them if they were selecting something?
Well, again, I think the biggest kind of statement that they always try to put on these apps is that they do not and are not a replacement to a licensed practitioner. Right now, like I mentioned, there's not a generative AI FDA approved app out there, and that's really the reason why there hasn't been a validated way yet of saying that this app that let's say looks at cognitive behavioral therapy and says that it is an approved app to be used for that purpose. You want to make sure that it's used maybe as a secondary aspect to therapy, that it's used as a way to ensure that the patient is potentially following along with their certain protocols of therapy that they're supposed to be following along on. I think right now, today, it's a way to ensure that you can get some help. But even within the app structure of some of the ones that are out there now, they still get to a point where, okay, if they do sense a patient's vulnerability or a patient maybe needing some help, then they do recommend that patient does contact a mental health provider to get additional help. And so I think that's kind of what's in the works now that's actually happening, because they haven't gotten a defined way of using generative AI as a true tool to treat that patient.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so one of the articles that you forwarded to me, the example was someone had made a comment to the app and said something about like, I can't do anything about this now. I'll jump the bridge when I get to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So instead of cross the bridge when I get to it, they said jump the bridge when I get it. And so the app responded, oh, it looks like you may need additional care assistance. Would you like some links for it? Because it heard jump and bridge.
Yeah.
And that's a phrase that's been programmed into it to alert the app to then provide that next level of care.
Correct. Yeah. And again, I think what happened in that situation was that it would make that recommendation that they should go talk to a provider. And that's kind of what the default is on those systems currently. And that is, kind of one of the good and bad, kind of plays within the data that's being used and how it's being portrayed. And so when it does recognize I would call it a tag word, that is a concern word, then they will put those elements of saying, hey, because of this, you should go see your practitioner. And what's good with a lot of those is that they will allow them a listing of, basically providers that would be close by that you could actually contact directly. So there is some kind of nice little tools that they put into those that help kind of direct you to go see, Dr. Smith or Dr. Jones directly. But again, it's not making a true diagnosis or true treatment of therapy for that patient.
Yeah. And I know, so for example, my therapist, the program that I use, there's an app component to it. So I have a weekly check-in and I answer, but the questions that I answer for like depression and anxiety are the standard questions that are included for the DSM, guidelines to see levels of severity. They're always the exact same questions. There's nothing intuitive or changed in it. And it's just sending that score to the therapist. So it's just one extra tool that the therapist is using, which I think is really key as well right now, is that we're big proponents at RAN of encouraging people to explore a variety of tools for their mental well-being, and it could be, apps that I like. And there's an AI app that I like that is a journaling app. And what I like about it is I write the things I'm thinking and then I press generate and it says it so much better. And I don't know, this may sound a little silly, but when it says it so much better, I kind of feel like it's saying, I'm like, oh, you get me. It's like a little hug. And I'm actually not one of those people that's addicted to social media or anything on my phone. I have other addictions, but that's not one of them. But I do love that. I'm like, oh, okay, you understand me, like, and so I think that's a cool additive tool to use. And thinking about it as an additive tool, it could be something that then you could forward on to your therapist or something like that and use in conjunction with an overall treatment plan, just like we would for any other area of life we want to improve. Like if you want to get a professional coach because you want to improve your leadership skills, they're going to give you some tools and maybe some AI tools to play around with, and then you're going to meet with them and go over them. So what would you say some of your favorite things about this have been? Like, what are you most excited about? What gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the aspect of how we can help patients. Right? And I'm talking mental health here. I look at it as you've got patients who are, let's say, on medications. You've got patients that can basically wear wearables. So there's maybe a sensor type of device, wearable watch, maybe something that has some type of sensory component potentially in the future that could be maybe connected onto the brain and brain waves. All of that data, again, the data part of it, and then taking all that data and having obviously the generative AI run off of it. There's going to be some really cool aspects of certain treatments of mental health issues. Is it depression? Is it something on the ADD side? Is it something on the bipolar side? They're going to be able to find out based on some of the elements of data that's coming in, better ways to treat those patients. I think that's going to be really cool. The other part of it is on the data side, as you mentioned, Ange, the part of, if you're answering certain questions or putting in certain information, how that is looked at from a generative AI standpoint, how that relates back to the patient directly, based on all the other patients that are putting data into the system. That's going to be very, very telling over the next couple of years. And so I think as we're getting more and more aspects of pulling all that data together from all sorts of different areas, having it all kind of put into one element of I guess, a data basket, and having the information run off of it, that's going to be really cool. The other part of it is I'm going to go strictly on the pharmaceutical side, because again, you mentioned that with clinical trials, and in my background, working with some of the larger medications in the depression side and bipolar side. So you've probably heard of Paxil, Paxil-CR, which is a antidepressant medication. Another one was Wellbutrin or Wellbutrin SR or XL. But I also worked with Lamictal. That was actually on the bipolar side for more of the bipolar depression. And I look at, kind of the way the generative AI is moving into the mental health space, where over a period of time, as patients are on medications, the ability to trace and track patients, not only through a clinical trial when you're going to try to approve a product, but also when those patients are on the product currently, where you can actually, through data, really kind of trace and track how that patient's doing, with a certain medication level, with a certain medication being taken over a period of time, with certain medications being taken within combination of other therapies. That type of data side of things, I think that's going to be really telling over the next couple of years as well, because again, all of that data coming in, having the ability to run the data through generative AI and seeing where there might be benefits of a certain patient being on this medication compared to this medication is going to be very telling. Yeah, kind of the last thing, but I just want to hit on is, the aspect of, population health. I think as we're moving forward, the issue with, kind of mental health in general, there's 790 million people around the world that have some type of mental health concern. 790 million. Okay. That's a lot of people.
A lot. Yes.
And so a million people. So out of that, 28 million here in the United States alone have no mental health treatment at all. And so I think where it's really beneficial is that when these apps are out there and as they become more prolific and more, I think, beneficial and useful, the ability for patients to have better access, I think it's going to be very, very telling, where they'll be able to actually get to having to worry about driving to a certain medical office that might be 50 miles or 70 miles away. They can actually pick up their, iPad or phone, talk to a mental health practitioner, maybe get on an app and start really kind of working through some of their mental health concerns and probably get the therapy in or treatment that they need. I think that's going to be kind of a huge benefit as well.
I love that so much. In fact, when Jennifer and I talked about her program out of Harvard and Boston, she also talked about all the work that she did in the telehealth area. And I've said, I think telehealth is a lifesaver for me. I mean, I'm COO of a software company. I work a gazillion hours a week, and yet I can have a 45-minute session with my therapist during a quick lunch break and go straight back into the office. I don't have to drive there. I don't have to sit in an awkward waiting room. I don't, and then sit in there with me and then drive home and have all of that, exhaustion tied to it. That then is often the time where individuals say, okay, I can't, this is just too much of an overload. I can't continue on with therapy. And so they may discontinue therapy before they really need to discontinue therapy. Another thing I love, tying back to the prescription thing that you were saying, is the idea of being able to so a couple of things I'm thinking of. Okay. So I used to do research also in hypertension space. And so high blood pressure patients, and these patients, had to take their meds before they would come in, and their blood pressure had to be in a certain range. And they would fill out their medical, prescription paper in the car, but right before they walked in for the last 6 weeks they take it and
how they're feeling and yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're like, okay, I can clearly see this is written the exact same way. Like, I'm not stupid. And the idea of having some of these apps, so you give a patient, let's just say Lamictal. I want to use Lamictal as an example because it was the first medication I was ever on. My doctor thought I had bipolar. And he put me on Lamictal. Well, if you don't know this, if you don't have bipolar, if you have depression instead, and you're put on bipolar medicine, it can skyrocket your depression. And so, and I didn't know this. I mean, I was in my like late 30s, early 40s, the first time I'd ever been into anything. And I suddenly had a huge, massive, major depressive episode, but I didn't know what was happening, right? Imagine if he'd given it to me and said, okay, it's very important every day that what I want you to do is you log these symptoms and you log these emotions, and it will sync with my patient portal.
Yeah.
And then, quite frankly, I remember I actually spent a exorbitant amount of money at one point in that period of time. I think it would have saved me a lot of money had we caught it before we did.
That was the manic stage, probably, right?
Yeah, you're right, exactly. But yeah, so and also I love the idea of thinking about an app for individuals who do have bipolar, because I've worked with, especially, running the nonprofit and having a lot of individuals who have bipolar, and they have often said, "Oh, I realized I was in a manic episode afterwards," or
Right.
other people can tell when I'm in a manic episode, but I can't tell. But if you were willing to use something this and track it, and it were to pop up and say, hey, maybe reach out to your therapist, not making a diagnosis, but trends. So data is only really valuable if it includes those trend components of it, right?
Right.
And looking at those trends, I mean, I just can imagine the amount of life savings that it can have in those areas.
Oh, exactly. Well, again, if you've got the therapist meeting that you've had, let's say on a Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you're doing work on the app, and then all of a sudden Sunday, there's something that triggers. There's something, again, it might be a phrase that you put in there, or it might be an answer that you might have placed into the app. It says, hey, you are potentially going into that manic episode, and we're on the other side, the depression episode. That would be something that would be hugely beneficial. And again, the app could potentially then provide me the information to say, hey, you need to go, talk to your therapist, or in that telehealth service type of scenario, it literally pops you into the realm of a direct feed to a telehealth provider. So there's some huge, I think, win-wins of using the apps and using the services that, again, provide the data that can help that patient either way.
Yeah, we also talked about building some apps where perhaps you log when you take your meds, and if you choose to stop taking your meds, it then like pops up things that help you remind you about why it's important to take your meds, and some of those things that are like some symptoms you may have, or some or things to look out for if you're not going to take your meds. Be careful of this symptom. If you have this symptom, reach out to your doctor, something like that, to try and improve compliance in that way. Or some people also don't take their meds because they don't like the side effects, especially if you have men that have side effects that are like sexual dysfunction or something like that. They may be way more willing to click that on an app than they are to call up the doctor and say something about it, right? And so so they might click it on the app and then sync the data and just be like, okay, I'm just going to wait and see what they do. That would be great.
And there's that privacy side too, where I think a lot of folks, again, who don't go, get that mental health, need service, they don't go see that provider. A lot of it is kind of I would say from a institution standpoint, a lot of folks don't feel comfortable, talking to a doctor that's, in the mental health capacity. They don't feel that they, need to have that help. And I think the apps do allow, I think, the privacy to be able to do that, which is hugely beneficial. But it also, again, I think alleviates a lot of the, I would say the shyness, the aspect of, having that, I'm trying to figure the word I'm looking for. It's the ability of, providing that patient control over their own situation, as opposed to, having that practitioner have that control. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, so they have like some autonomy in it, and can sit and, I mean, we live in a texting age, I mean, my boyfriend listens to this podcast and he knows I don't want to talk on the phone. Just send me a text. And when my employees this morning, she was like, "You're such a Gen Z." I'm getting close to turning 50. So, but I'm like, no, I love to like text my therapist and just be really quick while I'm thinking about it and done
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah.
And there's something very therapeutic about that as well, because I then don't harbor it in my head. I'm just like, okay, I'm letting him know this. And then I'm moving on with my day, and he can collect that information. And if it's concerning to him, then he can reach out and schedule something with me. And if
But
not,
again, take it one step further. Again, let's say that texting is in the portal type of system within the app or the portal of electronic health record system. That text that you're sending could be, and I would assume probably the next 1 or 2 years, could be part of that AI component. Where again, based on what you're texting, there could be elements of saying, "Hey, it needs to be." A priority to that physician to get back to you, or maybe it goes down a different road, give you feedback on what maybe needs to be happening next.
yeah, I love
So very
that.
good stuff.
So I love this article you sent me. Was it yesterday or this morning? Yeah, the FDA clears prescription digital therapeutic for major depressive. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's WISA. So if you're not familiar with the WYSA AI, that was approved about a year ago. So that was actually, as I mentioned, there's nothing right now that's been approved from the FDA around generative AI and mental health application or tool. Just hasn't been approved yet. Now they're working on a number of them. I think that was another one I sent you from Dartmouth. They're working on one, but within WISA, that is one that really kind of looked at chatbots being used with generative AI. So there's basically data coming in. They've got basically the pathways defined on what they get as a result from the answers out of the behavioral health questions. And so it's more of a machine learning type of application. It's been FDA approved. It's great. It's a great tool. Again, I think it does have its limitations. It gets to a point where, okay, the patient maybe has answered a certain question a certain way. And at that point in time, then they funnel it out to actually have that patient see him or talk to a mental health practitioner. But I think, again, in the next probably year or two, it'll spin that over into more of a generative AI situation where it'll be able to pick up more of the following, information of, is it that, the bridge concern you mentioned earlier. So, is there a tag word that would basically say, okay, I've got to move into this element pretty quickly based on some of the testing that's been provided.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I'm thinking of, for example, the 988 line and the talk line where you can text, the crisis text line.
Yeah.
I mean, they that's the exact same thing. It's just individuals that are texting with people, and when they are trained in, they're humans, but they're trained humans, and when they hear certain things or read certain things, if you're texting with them, right? Then they encourage you to call someone, or if you text certain things and they're super concerned, they will call and have a health check done on you.
Yeah, which is very, very important. Agreed.
Yeah, which I could imagine that would have to be built into apps like this as they continue to progress into generative AI, because I also think, okay, I hate to think about the legal perspective of this, but of course I think about there's always individuals that are looking for a lawsuit of some sort and overlooking the mass majority of the benefit for the couple of challenges. So how would you say, as a just community, that we would navigate through thinking through some of those legal concerns?
Yeah, good question. I think, part of it really goes back to, is it FDA approved or not? So I think there's some legalities that are alleviated, once you do have an app that does get an FDA approval. It does help from that. Where I think there's some ways that they're getting around it is the language up front. I think when a person signs up for a certain app, there's a sign-off at the beginning that basically they're asking the patient to alleviate any type of concerns or legalities that might come up, that it's not an app that is making a diagnosis. It's not an app that is giving a treatment. It's just an app to help that person or that individual, kind of get through their mental health concerns at this point in time. So I think that's part of the way they're able to get around it. But I think as we're moving more and more into the generative AI, FTA approved type of apps in the next couple of years, that is going to be a question. Then if it's, if there's different algorithms that are set up within the systems that may not be checked or checked correctly or checked rapidly enough, that would be, cause for concern. And that's where I think there's still, probably that Wild West scenario that's going on where there's got to be some rules, regulations, there's got to be some guidelines, there's got to be some guardrails of how we're building these apps and how we're using the generative AI tools going forward to ensure that we don't run into any major issues where you're affecting your patient's health, you're affecting your patient's outcome. That is to be determined, yes, but it's hopefully something that when somebody's building these apps, that they're keeping that in mind. They're keeping the patient at the forefront of kind of the aspect of how that app is supposed to work, and hopefully, in the future, we'll be alleviating for legal problems.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think of, I am now working to help build my second software company. The first one was in clinical research, but it was in document management. So when we were building Florence Healthcare, my biggest concern was HIPAA, right?
Yeah.
So Health Information Privacy Portability Act. And I was concerned about documents that were put into our system. And the largest or the highest insurance premium we paid was for HIPAA insurance in the event somehow a document got out. And to my knowledge, no documents have ever gotten out. I've been away from Florence for a couple of years. But anyway, so much attention through everything that we did and every release. In fact, I remember when we were doing our QA and early releases, having to explain to the developers, like, no, we can't have any of these bugs. This is not like a normal software company. Like, that Apple can release a new release of your iPhone, and then 2 days later, release a new release to fix the bugs that they went ahead and released 2 days ago, right? We can't do that in the healthcare space. And I think the same thing for an FDA cleared one. If I were running that company, I don't know. I'm going to record this. So then if I'm lying, we can go back to this episode, Eric, and record and say, I don't think I ever want to run and be in charge of an app software company that does this. I'm just afraid of the legal component of it. I love the idea, though, of I'm actually thinking of the apps a little bit like vitamins, where you see on the thing, that it's not whatever the approval is through the FDA or not through the FDA, thinking about that for apps, right? And so thinking about it, if I were a therapist, I think I would test out an app, I would myself, and I would figure out the nuances, and I would probably have multiple releases that my client had to sign. But after doing that, if I were a therapist, I would absolutely use a whole bunch. I would be all about use this journaling app, use this mood app, send these things to me, because I can aggregate that data, and then I can track and use those trends for that individual, and I can actually continue to help people live better lives.
Agreed. Well, I think one of the ones I sent you was on NBC News. It was an app called Coco, Koko. But what they actually did is that they took folks' data, so basically they were using the app, and then they actually took it kind of sideways and ran it through without them knowing into generative AI. And so it's kind of already happening. Kind of scary from that standpoint. I think where, from a future standpoint, hopefully, and again, I say hopefully that, they're going to be designing these apps to where, when they go through the approval process for the FDA, they've got it basically like a drug clinical trial. They're running the app and the data around it through a clinical trial of people. So they've got basically a certain number of users. They've got a certain period of time that the users are using the app, and basically they're getting the information from it, and then obviously looking at the outcomes part of it. I'm hoping that around that wrapping is basically the guardrails or the regulations internally to that app of how they're using the data and how it's being run through the different algorithms. I'm hoping that's the case. And I'm sure the FDA is really anxious, yes, because they don't really know a lot of what's going on with Gen AI themselves, which is frustrating in and of itself, but also very open to the knowledge of what it can do. Because I do think that they see that, as this information, this data is coming in and how it can be used to make determining, treatment protocols or make determining health outcome systems work in tandem with, let's say, insurance coverage, et cetera. How that element of information is being used, and if it's under some sort of a guideline and guardrail, I think that is going to be the element of what we'll see going forward. Yes, very strict guidelines around that from an approval standpoint, but also, again, once it is approved, and proven out that it's given, very, very good, valid outcomes, valid, treatment protocols, valid information to really help those patients.
Yeah, and valid criteria on what constitutes in a new release that needs to be approved by the FDA first before it's released. One other thing that I was thinking, the FDA right now is really, really, really big on diversity plans for clinical trials. Okay.
Correct.
And so I could see in this instance, your diversity plan would have to include, usually the diversity plans are for individuals from different socioeconomic groups and different genders, races, all of these types of things. And there are reasons for that, right? I can see in this having to consider, different levels of skill with technology, different level, like educational levels,
disability levels coming in. So obviously from hearing standpoint, sight standpoint, agree.
Yep. I really think that the FDA is going to have to expand their diversity plan requirements in here to ensure that anyone who's using a device like this independently on their own. And so hence all the software developers out there, I will tell you this, what I used to tell all of my developers at Florence, the key to success is reduce the clicks, make it as easy as possible.
Easy is good.
Easy is good. Make it so that someone doesn't have to be taught how to use it. And of course, the reality is we have people from all walks of life. So that phrase is a little bit impossible, but people are learning how to use phones and stuff like that. So the reality is making it complicated is not the secret to success. That is not what it is. Easy is good. Reduce the clicks and help people heal.
So is there the language barriers and all of that? Correct.
Yes, absolutely. So is there anything you really hoped we would cover, Eric, that we haven't covered yet?
I just think, you mentioned the telehealth side. I think, that is going to be a huge win-win on the healthcare front. Again, you've got the companies like Teladoc and Animal, et cetera, where, they're really at the forefront of the telehealth kind of application after COVID, or even really during COVID, when that became pretty apparent that there was a really lack of communication that was going on between patients that needed help and the practitioners. And obviously the telehealth kind of economy has boomed around that. And I think as that's moved forward, people, as you mentioned, becoming more at ease in basically using their phones or using their iPads and talking to a practitioner as opposed to going into an office. That's, I think, a huge win-win. Where I think it's really going to be hugely beneficial is that as the information comes in from these apps, from a Gen AI standpoint, to provide that added kind of definition of data into that practitioner, they are going to be able to use that information more to their benefit in how they treat those patients. And I think that's ultimately kind of what's going to happen pretty quickly over the next couple of years, where they're going to be able to kind of pull that information in from the behavioral information that's coming out of that patient to basically the drug interaction that they're getting from that patient. So if a patient's on a certain, 1, 2, or 3 medications, they're doing well, that's great. With this added behavioral information, that's even more great. That practitioner can really make a determining factor on what that patient needs. On the flip side, if there's those elements where the patient's responding a certain way, where it may be negative or may not be, really spot on or correct, or that, they're getting maybe some, issues with their medication they're taking, be it weight gain, as you mentioned earlier, sexual dysfunction, if they're getting maybe a more potential depression mode or manic mode, those elements pulled in to the forefront from a data standpoint helps that practitioner again determine whether or not that medication is the right medication or the right therapy. So, I think that's where a lot of this information, because of the data that's coming in, is going to be so helpful on the mental health side. And then again, I think the other aspect is just the clinical trial side. So as we're looking at new clinical trials for new drugs, having more and more data coming in, more feedback from patients using those medications are going to be probably very, very relevant in determining new medication pathways, new medication, I think, elements that probably we haven't even thought about yet based on some of the feedback we get from patients. So I think that's going to be a kind of win-win as well.
Absolutely. One thing that just occurred to me, Eric, when you were saying that is I know a lot of therapists now, and therapy burnout for therapists is a legit challenge. So I could imagine if I were a therapist and I was truly passionate with what I was doing, the idea that I could actually also get some continued learning through this. I could get the data from my patients, and I could have this generative AI say, okay, patients across this demographic that are similar to yours have also tried this, this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
And have you, given these as options? Or, I mean, gosh, whatever. If you want to sell a course, have you taken a course in this type of therapy to expand your ability to help your patients versus being in a world where you're trying the same thing over and over, but it's not the right thing for that particular patient, which is why we talk a lot about trying different modalities. But as a therapist, if you had something that was also helping you analyze that data and giving you additional ideas of things to help your patients with, I think that would just be so amazing.
I agree. Well, it goes back to the individualized therapy.
Yes.
Part of it, where, and I will say, I would say probably in the next 2 to 3 years, hopefully sooner, but I would say 2 to 3 years, the determination of, giving a patient a blood test, obviously, taking into account what medications they're on, taking into account any type of wearable data that's coming in, if it's pulse ox, if it's EKG, ECG, if it's anything around the respiratory or oxygen input, et cetera. I mean,
or like a
brain
sweat
activity,
collector
all
that
of
can
that.
tell, that can tell different hormones that are being placed
Yeah,
out via sweat.
exactly. So, all of that kind of stuff that's coming in from the data set standpoint, is going to help us figure out, okay, this patient at this age, with this medication that they're taking, and this issue that they have as far as being mental health or cardiac or whatever, this is the drug that they should be using as opposed to that, based on the fact that this drug works better with that type of patient than it does with that type of patient. And that's what's really going to be cool in the next couple of years. We'll be able to really define, specifics on what a patient needs, as opposed to just throwing a garbage, can of medications their way and having them figure it out for themselves.
And I know that GeneSight has worked to try and do that from a blood genetic level. I've had mine run through, and it gives you, red, yellow, green on different medications. And I don't know how far it's been validated or where that stands. But once again, the good thing about data is you could use that as a piece of data. You could use these wearables. You could use these because also individuals change based on time. Maybe they may go to a new job, or they're suddenly working night shift. They're not getting any sleep, and that's exacerbating their bipolar, which is then throwing them into this other episode. And oh, by the way, they're also not taking their meds, right?
Yeah.
And so you have these different factors, but there are ways to be able, like you said, all of these wearable options that I currently, I hate it if I forget to charge my Apple Watch, because I'm addicted to the Sleep Watch app. And I can tell, for example, when I've had alcohol to drink, I can tell when I wake up the next morning, my score is so much lower than when I don't. And I mean, all these different things that I can see based off of that. And I think sleep is incredibly important. So hence why I'm obsessed with it. But I love data. So that's why, and I've loved this conversation. So Eric, it is a requirement of this podcast that everyone has to share their favorite motivational quote. So what is your favorite motivational quote?
Yeah, it's kind of timing wise. I know it's the day after the championship, and I have to say, I was rooting for Purdue. My mom's husband is a Purdue graduate from many years ago, and I was rooting for Purdue. And unfortunately, UConn also beat Illinois, where I was rooting for. So it was an unfortunate couple of weeks of basketball for me. But mine was tied into NC State, and we were part of the Final Four as well. And it was basically from Jim Valvano, never give up, never give up. And, that was really kind of his drive when he was going through his therapy for his cancer. And that really kind of has resonated, with me through the years. They won their national championship in 1983. I won't date myself, but I graduated high school in 83. And so, that was kind of one of the things that kind of just stuck with me over the years. And obviously when he battled his cancer, he really was, just driving himself, pushing himself, and really trying to make sure that it didn't take him. And unfortunately it did. But I think in due time, there was I think a large amount of benefit that came out of his fight. There was the V Foundation, which is a huge cancer relief foundation that's been around for a number of years, and ESPN pushes that every year, which is fantastic. But I think that never give up in any circumstance is always something that's always pushed me, no matter where you're at, what you're doing, how you're operating, how you're working, never give up. And I think that's just something that's, I think, very telling and an easy thing to remember.
So inspiring. Well, thank you, Eric, for coming today.
Thanks,
I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and thanks for everybody out there. And hopefully, and if you can, please, send out those links and all.
I will.
This out. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today with your coffee and conversation. We hope you've been encouraged and learned something from today's story. To learn more about today's guest, please check out our show notes for more details. Now it's time to remember to like this episode, subscribe, and turn on your notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. Recovery Advocate Network envisions a world where individuals with mental health challenges receive comprehensive and effective treatment without the worry of financial burdens to themselves or their families, all without the stigmas often present in society. We are proud that every individual worked with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by making a financial donation via PayPal or Venmo, or email donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org if you would like to donate items for our next fundraising auction. Please visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org to learn more. Now, stay in the loop about upcoming events, future episodes, and more by following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, TikTok, LinkedIn, and all major podcast platforms. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. How do you do that? Visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, and in the top right corner, click that comment button and comment. So listeners, what do you need to do? Pause what you're doing, subscribe, follow us. Please give us a like and a 5-star rating, write some meaningful comments, and most importantly, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose heart you will touch, so please be a part of a reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist,
national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
Maybe they may go to a new job, or they're suddenly working night shift,
shelter,
they're not
support
getting
group
any
resources,
sleep, and that's exacerbating
food,
their
and/or a
bipolar,
safe,
which is then
confidential
throwing them
path
into
out of
this
physical
other
or
episode.
emotional
And oh, by the
domestic
way,
abuse.
they're also
Please
not
call
taking their
211 or
meds,
visit
right?
www.211info.org
And so you have
for
these different
assistance.
factors.
Now,
But there
we know
are ways
you are
to
very
be
busy,
able, like you
and we are
said, all
grateful
of
that
these
you said
wearable
yes to sharing time with us
options
today.
that I
If you stuck to our three C's
I
of
hate
engagement
it
and
if I
listened to the
forget
full
to charge my
episode,
Apple Watch,
then
because I'm addicted
visit the podcast
to
section
the
of our
Sleep Watch
website
app.
and
And
leave
I
the
can
comment
tell,
about the
for
podcast.
example, when
And
I've
you'll
had
be entered
alcohol to
to
drink,
win
I
an
can tell
autographed
when I wake
copy
up the next
of one of the
morning, my
books from one of our
score
book
is so
club
much
series,
lower
as well as a coffee
than
and
when I
conversation
don't.
coffee mug.
And I mean, I
So,
think when I
thanks
all
again.
these different
Until
things
next
that I can
time,
see
back
based
to
off
your
of that, and I
coffee.
think sleep is incredibly important. So hence why I'm obsessed with it. But I love data, so that's why. And I've loved this conversation. So Eric, it is a requirement of this podcast that everyone has to share their favorite motivational quote. So, what is your favorite motivational quote?
Yeah, it's kind of timing wise. I know it's the day after the championship, and I have to say, I was rooting for Purdue. My mom's husband is a Purdue graduate from many years ago, and I was rooting for Purdue. And unfortunately, UConn also beat Illinois, where I was rooting for. So it was an unfortunate couple of weeks of basketball for me. But mine was tied into NC State, and we were part of the Final Four as well. And it was basically from Jim Valvano, never give up, never give up. And that was really kind of his drive when he was going through his therapy for his cancer, and that really kind of has resonated with me through the years. They won their national championship in 1983. I won't date myself, but I graduated high school in 83, and so that was kind of one of the things that kind of just stuck with me over the years. And obviously when he battled his cancer, it was he really was just driving himself, pushing himself, and really trying to make sure that it didn't take him, and unfortunately it did. But I think in due time there was a large amount of benefit that came out of his fight. There was the V Foundation, which is a huge cancer relief foundation that's been around for a number of years, and ESPN pushes that every year, which is fantastic. But I think that never give up in any circumstance is always something that's always pushed me, no matter where you're at, what you're doing, how you're operating, how you're working. Never give up. And I think that's just something that's, I think, very telling and an easy thing to remember.
So inspiring. Well, thank you, Eric, for coming today.
Thanks,
I
Amy.
thoroughly enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and thanks for everybody out there. And hopefully, and if you can, please, send out those links and all.
I will.
This out. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Awesome.